Ah, okay, that's great. Oh, and also hello, Ben. Nice to see you. Um, I'm very pleased to welcome our Green Councillor for Arun, Steve McAuliffe. As well as being one of our excellent team of Green councillors, Steve was our parliamentary candidate for Arun and the South Downs last year, and he succeeded in increasing the Green vote by over 6%. In his other life, Steve is a professional ecologist, so we are lucky to have his professional expertise as well as his local government experience. I'm also pleased to say that Emily O'Brien has joined us. Emily is a councillor for the Lewis District Council. The Green Party is the majority party in Lewis, and their Rights to the River Charter has been a groundbreaking milestone. And so with no more from me, I will hand you over to Steve.
Thank you. I'm going to share the screen, see how that goes. How's that? All good?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Right. I'm going to move that away so I can actually see the screen. Bear with me. Okay. Right. So, yes, for those of you that are wondering, I have stretched that image so I look a lot thinner, and you can judge me if you like. I don't care. I'll also draw your attention to the qualifications on the bottom left-hand side. You will notice that none of those relate to philosophy or environmental law or sociology or anthropology. None of the disciplines that are actually closely related to rights of river. So when I was asked to do this talk, I thought, I'm not exactly best placed to do it. But I think what changed my mind was, whilst a lot of people are working on this from the academic perspective and the jurisprudence perspective, there are far fewer people that have actually tried to take the theory and turn it into something tangible and real. And we're lucky that we've got a few people on the call tonight that have done that. So I think having that perspective is useful, as well as all the other academic stuff that's going on in the background. So the focus is going to be these broad topics. So a little bit of a background on rights of rivers for those people that aren't completely familiar with it. Then I'm going to go into a little bit of detail of how we've gone about it in Arun, what challenges we faced and what opportunities we've managed to find. And then a little bit of a take on what the direction for the future of rights of rivers could be. And I've got some of my own opinions thrown in there. So it'll be really interesting when we're done with the presentation to discuss what people think about that. Especially Emily, you might have some really useful input, and it'd be interesting to see if we agree or not. So I'm looking forward to that bit. So really I'm focusing on the how we do rights of rivers rather than should we do it, because I think we've kind of got to that point where we're agreeing that we should. So how do we make it happen? And just as a slight aside, given that we've got plenty of time because we've already got myself speaking, some people get this right from the start. People think absolutely, intrinsically, no doubt whatsoever, that we should have rights for rivers. I wasn't one of those people. I was quite skeptical to begin with. When it was first mentioned to me, I think my first reaction was, oh my God, what is this ridiculous hippie nonsense? Or something along those lines, because the concept of taking a non-sentient entity and giving it rights of personhood just didn't make it wasn't obvious to me that we should do that. I mean, we barely do that for animals, and now we're talking about doing it for bodies of water. So it took me a little while, but I couldn't get it out of my head and started thinking about it. And because of my background, so one of those qualifications on the other slide was arboriculture. So I know trees. And I thought, hold on a second, we sort of give rights to trees through protections by the tree preservation order route. So it might not be completely alien. And then I started thinking about scheduled ancient monuments, so Hadrian's Wall and Stonehenge. And we give those extra protection and almost a right to not be destroyed through the legal system. So there's an analogy there. And then I thought, okay, listed buildings. Then I thought about my own role on the South Downs National Park, where I'm appointed to the board of a national park to speak up for a completely non-sentient made-up entity. It's a line on a map. And then I found out after doing some research that we give the right of personhood to corporations. And that was when it's like, oh my God, look, if we can do this for companies, surely we can do it for rivers. And that was the turning point for me. So from that point on, I've been trying to make that happen, because it's a growing movement. It's being popularized around the world. It goes back longer than a lot of people think. People think back to 2017 and the Wanganui River judgment in New Zealand, but actually Ecuador in 2008 put the rights of nature into their constitution, a very high level of government ideology. Colombia granted rights to the River Arato in 2016. But 2017, when New Zealand did it, it seemed to push people to get things moving. So Bangladesh, a year or so later, they put all of their rivers into a rights system. And Canada last year with the Magpie River, they afforded rights to that. And what I think the main point is, the more we do this, the more it's advertised and the more it gets into public consciousness, is we shift to this rights of nature philosophy. And that's the really important bit, because we're moving from a system where humanity is having an exploitative relationship with nature. It's what can nature give us? How do we use it to sustain ourselves? To a more mutual relationship and a realization that nature needs us, and by God, we need nature. And it's about mutual survival. The planet will carry on, nature will carry on whether we're here or not. So if we want to survive as a species, we need to have a shift in mindset. And I think that's where rights of nature and rights of rivers takes us. So, okay, so we talked about rights. What are these rights? There are 6 of them, as defined by the Earth Law Centre, and that was done in 2017. The right to flow, the right to perform essential functions. Actually, on one of the slides later, the Lewis District Charter really explains these very well, far better than I can. So we can have a look at those a bit later. So the right to be from pollution. That's a no-brainer. We're all aware of that, and the companies, sewage companies and agriculture. The right to be fed and be fed. I like this one because it talks about water that's below ground as well as above it, and that's often a missed aspect of this whole conversation. The right to native biodiversity, that can be potentially problematic. There's a little bit of a conflict there with animal rights, especially when you get into invasive animals like signal crayfish and quagga mussels and American bullfrogs and things like that. So there's a little bit of tension there. So that's an interesting debate point. And the right to regeneration and restoration. And for me, that's what it's all about, actually. I think number 6 should be number 1, because everything flows from number 6 if you restore and regenerate the rivers that we've degraded so far. But it's a cycle, so it doesn't matter too much, I guess. I'm just being a bit pedantic, probably. So the rights of nature, it's always been part of Green Party philosophy, it has been for decades. Wherever we have Greens elected, we push for rights for nature, focusing on rights of rivers. I'm not entirely sure what Hugh Fernley's Whittingstall is holding up there, but Ellie Chown seems to find it amusing, so that's all good. But so whenever we get into local authorities, we try to push this agenda forward. And obviously our 4 Green MPs, they can push from the legislative level, and that's the really important bit, and we discuss that a little bit as we go through the slides. So being a district councillor in Arun, there are 6 Greens, so we were able to push this forward quite quickly, and with quite a bit of buy-in from the other groups. And we followed in the wake of other South Coast Green councillors. We looked at the Lewis motion, and Lewis were ahead of the game by far. And I just basically nicked their motion and then just reworded it slightly so it was more appropriate for the Arun. From there, it moved west, Ada and Worthing. They started looking at it, and then I was looking at it in Arun, and Horsham were looking at it as well. So we got a really nice block in Sussex and along the south coast. And the way I introduced it was quite subtly and quite low key. Intentionally didn't go for legal personhood. That's the gold standard. That's what they did in New Zealand in 2017, which what made it so special. But I knew damn well we wouldn't be able to get that through. It's too much of a mind shift. I mentioned my journey from thinking it as silliness to absolutely we should do it. But when I've got 5 minutes to present a motion, it's quite difficult to get that across to a skeptical audience. So we purposely didn't do that. And the way we wanted to do it was just introduce the idea of exploring what we could do as a local authority. So the motion was really, okay, focusing on the River Arun, because that's something everybody in the council can relate to, because it's a very prominent feature of our landscape here in the district. People drive across it on bridges, wherever they go. The two main arteries that cut across the district go across the Arun. So everybody knows it, everybody can relate to it. It's a tangible thing that people can get on board with. And because we were trying to introduce it in quite a low-key way by saying, look, let's just look at what's realistic here. What can we do? Is it possible? Is it not possible? What's viable? Let's just take a couple of years to do a fact-finding exercise to see where we go, to see where it takes us. And if in 2 years' time we come back and say, you know what, and there's nothing we can do, this is going nowhere, then fair enough. But at least we've had a look at it, and we've taken the time to examine the options and try to do what we can where we can. So that's where things got a little bit tricky, because it was very evident that once the motion was raised, it all went very quiet from the council staff side of things, who then program it to go onto agendas and create reports and make sure it's on the agenda and all those sorts of things. There was nothing happening for a few months. So I started asking questions. So where is it? Why is it not on the program? And we started getting some really sort of yes minister style responses. So it's like, oh yeah, yes, it's coming forward. We've got a very busy agenda at the moment, but it will come. It will definitely come forward in due course when the time is right at the appropriate juncture. All of those sorts of comments. I said, oh, come on, look, there's clearly something going on here. So what is it? Let's discuss it. Let's find out what your problems are. And it really boiled down to these points, probably the top 5 in particular. And the key problem is we have nothing in English law that allows local authorities to tie anything onto top level legislation so we can introduce rights. There are very few powers a local authority has. And that was really the key stumbling block. It was just outside the mindset. It was outside the system for the staff to try to do anything with this without supporting legislation. It was considered that the Environment Agency had the responsibility for protecting rivers through the licensing scheme, where they set parameters for all the discharges to rivers based on the parameters of the river and what's going into the river from that discharging, and saying, yeah, okay, there's enough dilution in the river where this potentially harmful thing you're discharging won't cause harm, if all goes well. And when it doesn't, then they prosecute. So that was another barrier to council officers that felt it's really not within their remit to be looking at this. And then there was the point that Arun District Council doesn't actually own the River Arun or any part of it. All of the river is in private ownership. So they have the riparian ownership rules means that if you own a piece of land next to the river, you also own the river to the midpoint. So, you know, you have potentially hundreds of river owners, and we cannot impose rights upon them. It's not our property. And the River Arun runs through 3 authority areas. It rises in Mannings Heath, southeast of Horsham, flows west through Horsham District, into the South Downs National Park area, which is another authority, then into Arun District. So the third authority. So unless you get all of those people working together, all of those administrations working together, then there's really not much that can be done. And then there was the fundamental question of, well, rights to what, Steve? What is it you're talking about here? You're talking about the riverbed, the river banks, the water, all of it. Because if it's the water, if you're talking about pollution, then actually water comes from the land through the river basin and the catchment. So we're not actually talking about rights of the river per se, we're talking about rights of the catchment. Then that's a very different prospect. So what's our starting point? And these were all really valid points that were coming from the officers. These are difficult questions. And when they were coming into this cold as the rest of us, was trying to navigate what on earth we can do. And it was therefore considered that the original motion that we put forward, rights for the River Arun, was dead in the water. As far as officers are concerned, they could come back in 2 years' time and say, no, there's nothing we can do. It's outside our responsibilities. So that set a real challenge, because, you know, I didn't want to let this go, the Green Group didn't want to let it go, and we could see that other councils were progressing with it. So I had to try and recognise what the officers' concerns were, and then try to work with them and persuade them that, okay, fair enough, we can't maybe do rights as I envisaged it, but surely there are things that we can do with the limited powers we have. And that's where the conversation started to get useful. And we decided as a group that, given that the word rights was the real issue and people not knowing how to deal with that, that we should remove the word rights. And we should focus on the word protection, because everybody can agree that we want to protect the river as much as we can. So you don't have to get bogged down in the word rights and what that means and the legal side of things. We can just talk about protection. So we eventually got it onto a committee agenda. We discussed it, we debated it, and I thought it was going to go through really easily. It turned out that wasn't the case at all. It was a really narrow vote, 5-4 in the end, and that surprised me a little bit. But most people agreed with it in principle. They just didn't think that this was the right time to do it because of devolution and because of the cost. You know, there was no discussion about how much it would cost. That was one of my key criticisms. People were saying, look, we can't afford to do this. I was like, look, we haven't decided what we're going to do yet. So how can you say it's going to cost lots of money? But anyway, we got this motion passed, and that's in the box in the blue text. And it's quite broad. One of the things I do like about it was we moved beyond the River Arun itself and managed to bring in all of the other watercourses within the district into scope. So the connected streams, tributaries, surface waters, so lakes and ponds, and that gave the council some power and some control, because we have lakes and ponds on public open spaces, for example, and we own little bits of land next to tributaries that connect to the River Arun. And one of the key things I wanted to introduce, and I had quite a few robust discussions about this, was making sure that we placed emphasis on what the council could do within its direct control. So within the direct control, we can come up with our own ideas, but we can also influence those people that want to work with us. So people that want to have contracts with us, for example, we can look at how we can influence decisions there, and processes there that can make the whole thing work as well as it can work. So it was quite a long journey. It was 18 months. From start to finish. We decided we wanted to do this as a Green Group in June 2023, and we finally got the motion passed in January of this year, January 30th. So yeah, all the hard work paid off. But did it? And this is the bit of the conversation that I think is the interesting bit, because we've got the motion. So what do we do with it? How do we turn that motion into positive action? How do we encourage Arun District Council to deliver on river protection in the way we hope they can? How do we get council staff to buy into this and deliver it? Because let's face it, council staff have got a lot going on at the moment. There's a lot of things on their agendas that are taking their eye off the smaller stuff like this. And we need to get this into the systems. It's councillors come and go. So yes, okay, we've got 6 greens at the moment and we can push for it and we can do what we can, but you know, we might not be there. The whole council isn't going to be there in 3 years. So what we want to do is try to leave a legacy of systems, procedures and policies, but also different ways of thinking. And I think that's the real difference, because a local authority is an incredibly authoritarian top-down structure. Councillors take ideas to chambers, they debate it. If they pass, officers go and write reports about what they think are the correct recommendations to bring back that we can do. We debate those, some of those pass, some of those fall, but it all comes from the top down. And I think the best way of doing this, and this is the way I've done it in companies I've run in the past, is actually to get the ideas from the bottom up, because that doesn't cost anything. You've already got people doing it. Those people also know their work streams really well. So they can see things that possibly wouldn't be picked up by an external consultant writing us a report. And if you have a mechanism by which they can pass those ideas through the chain and escalate them, so you can have a monthly agenda item on your team meetings, for example, where, okay, has anybody come across any ways that they can protect rivers this month? And maybe somebody's come up with an idea and they can escalate that, bring it forward, and we get a range of ideas coming forward across the piece. That's the idea. Now we need to try and make that work. And this is a very busy slide, but I think it makes the point and illustrates what I was just talking about making people come forward within the departments and seeing what each department can do. But that point in the middle where you've got that star, that's really quite important. And that's still something that councillors can use as a mechanism to make sure this stays on the agenda. Because in the Environment Act 2021, there was an enhanced duty on local authorities. So when they're going about their normal everyday business, they have to think of ways that they can enhance biodiversity. And one of the particular paragraphs within section 102 of that act is relating to species and habitats. Now, obviously, freshwater habitats are clearly defined. So you can use that argument. So whenever we're in a debate in the chamber and something's being discussed and a decision is about to be made, we can say, well, hold on a second, you haven't taken account of, you haven't considered how this policy, how this decision will enhance biodiversity and river habitats. So we can use that. But we can also encourage council staff to be creative. One of the things that happened very quickly after this was the licensing committee sat probably the week after the motion was passed. And officers came to me ahead of that meeting. They said, look, we've seen your motion, and one of the things that we can do as a team is encourage people to switch to electric engines on their boats on the River Arun, because everybody who operates a pleasure craft needs a license. Now, we can't make them have an electric motor, which stops direct discharges of diesel and petrol into the river from the motors, the outboard motors as they are. But what we can do is make it cheaper for them when they apply. We can give an incentive, we can nudge behavior perhaps. And yeah, I think that was great to see that coming forward so quickly. And the comms team got straight on it. They were very quick to publicize internally that this motion has been passed, and we wanted people to come up with ideas within their teams. And that's exactly what the licensing team did. But one of the big levers we've got is planning policy. That's probably the most legislative piece of work that a local authority does when it produces a local plan. So we can suggest to developers through the policies and through the design guides how we want them to work in relation to rivers and streams. So sustainable drainage systems are an obvious example, because all developments now have to produce a sustainable drainage system. What's not defined is what those sustainable drainage systems do before they discharge their water to the environment, because they don't necessarily discharge to the sewer system where it goes to a treatment works before discharge. They can discharge direct to the local watercourse. So what we're doing at the South Downs, because they're also going through the local plan process, is putting quite robust requirements for developers to create sustainable drainage systems that actually have a treatment effect through a cascading approach using nature-based solutions. So when the water runs off the estates with all of the herbicides that people are spraying on their drives, with all of the greases and the hydrocarbons that come off the cars that are sat overnight, and the salt that's spread on the pavements, all of that goes into the first pond, if you like. And what we're saying is you can't directly discharge that to the river. You have to put it through a slow attenuation process where you have intercepting vegetation and soil to clean that up before it's discharged. And we're looking at ways with the Environment Agency that we can put in monitoring and discharge consents, perhaps. This might be a step too far, but we're looking into it. So we've got the receiving water chemical composition and its quality, and you won't be allowed to discharge anything that's above the thresholds that are already there. So we're not going to have a cumulative effect. We're keeping it below the thresholds that already exist. We may not get away with that, but we're trying it, and Arun can do likewise. The comms team can also help with our partners. So within the district, we have quite a strong reach when it comes to social networks and social media. We have press releases, and we can support other people. So in the bottom of those blue boxes, the bottom left, the front image is a piece of work that's been put together by the University of Sussex, and it's the voluntary code of conduct for the River Arun. Now they've put that together in their own way without consultation with us, and it's great. So we can publicize that. We can put that out to tourists and visitors. Anybody hiring a boat, we can give them that. So there's ways that we can support that aren't directly under our control, but we can have some control over it, if that makes sense. But I think the right of representation is possibly the way forward here. So there's precedent in company, in the corporate world for this. So some of you may be familiar with a company called Faith in Nature, and they've appointed a person, a real person, to their board who speaks for nature when decisions are taking place. That's kind of unusual, but I think it's really positive. And it's analogous to what I do at the South Downs, actually. And it's what we do at the South Downs. We speak on behalf of the park for its protection. And it's the model that they've introduced in Australia, the River Yarra in Melbourne. What they've produced, it's slightly different to what they did in New Zealand with legal personhood. So they've created a statutory body that speaks and advocates for the river in the government decision-making process. And I think the rights of representation is probably where we need to get to. And interestingly, that's what Lewis District Council have introduced with their charter that they recently adopted. So if you look at the bullet points on the left-hand side, that's the charter that they've approved. And Emily can give us more information on this when we go to discussion. It's got the 6 rights that I showed on the slide earlier, the ones from the Earth Law Centre, but it's got an additional 2. And the bottom one is actually a right to representation. It's an influential and active voice. Now, I didn't speak to Lewis about my ideas on representation, and they didn't speak to me. We've come up with this independently, and so are other people around the world. So that makes me think that this is probably the way to go. And I certainly think it's the way to go to get from where we are now to get to legal personhood, which is a higher bar. This is probably an interim practical measure. I really like it. I think we should probably push for this. And we'll see what you think in the discussion. Because my key question is, well, do rights for rivers work? And the jury is very much out. In Bangladesh, where they issued rights for all of their rivers, they didn't introduce any legislation to back that up. Ecuador, with the rights of nature, constitutional, really high level, took 10 years to translate that into legislation. And they still haven't put in enforcement mechanisms for that legislation. So you can have a constitution, you can have the legislation, but if nobody's enforcing it, there's no point in having the constitution in the first place. And personhood is really quite a tricky thing. If we're talking about personhood for a river, in the corporate world, and this is where we're taking this from, personhood means rights and responsibilities. You can sue and be sued. So how does that work for a river? If we afford personhood to a river and it's therefore able to be sued, what happens if the river causes damage to property? What if a resident, a homeowner, a landowner wanted to sue the river? Who do they sue? How do they sue? What do they sue for? The river hasn't got any money, so who picks up the tab if that landowner wins? That's still unclear in the law, and which is why I like the representation model, because that shifts you to a power of attorney position. And we already have that set up. We know how that works. People identified legally to speak on behalf of people that can't speak for themselves. We could perhaps follow that model. It's a model of advocating where you have an independent voice or a guardian. I imagine if the Rivers Trust, for example, or even the Environment Agency, but the Rivers Trust, if they were statutory consultee in planning applications, we do it to a degree. So we have county archaeologists, we have tree surgeons, we have highways. Various people are asked to comment on an application because of the nature of the application and the impact it might have. We could do that for rivers, and I think the model's already there for us to just bolt that on and take that forward. I think we could do that really quickly and really easily. And I think we should probably think very closely about doing that. So in summary, the idea of rights of rivers has really gained ground in the last decade. And it seems to be moving to a position where it's gathering its own momentum. There's legal precedent being set. It looks like it's going to be doable, but that's not going to be for some time. It's really difficult to do without a legal basis to do it. which is why we need to keep lobbying MPs, especially our own Green MPs, but also all the other MPs, to give us the tools. Because local authorities can't do anything without legal tools to support them. There are many models to draw upon. We've outlined a few, but where we can't do that in the interim, because none of this is going to be done overnight, we need to be finding local workarounds. And that's why I put that slide up about what we can do through planning policy, what we can do through our communications, how we can support external partners. And let's not the perfect be the enemy of the good. Yes, we can't do everything, but there are things that we can do, and we need to be pushing those through the system where we can find a place to do that. And no matter what, the more we talk about this, the more we bring it into people's consciousness, we can shift to a position where we redefine our relationship with rivers and nature. This quote from Dr. Erin O'Donnell from the University of Melbourne, where the River Yarra Constitution, the Yarra Council was set up, really pins it down for me. So it's instead of focusing on what we want from the river, we begin to ask, what do we want for the river, and how do we get there with the river? And that's where we need to be in this whole conversation. So if this is something that particularly interests you, there are two good books that I think you should probably take a look at. There's The Politics of Rights of Nature. That's a free download. You can get that as a PDF, and I'd highly recommend that. And going back a bit, there's Should Trees Have Standing by Christopher Stone. That was released in 1972. It's been updated, but it was really a real excellent thought exercise back at the real start of the burgeoning environmental movement following Rachel Carson's seminal work, Silent Spring. Oh, by the way, Our Stolen Future, which was a follow-up to Silent Spring, is really worth a read. It's about endocrine disrupting chemicals and bioaccumulation through the food chain. Really, really interesting book. For those of you that like to watch as well as read, then there's the Rights of Nature YouTube video. It's about 50 minutes long. And the first half is particularly good. And the second half was interesting. It was quite surprising. So I would recommend those things if this is a subject that you think is interesting. And I will pass back to Anne.
Thank you, Steve. Gosh, that is lots and lots of different layers and complicated layers of thinking, isn't it? Emily, would you like to respond or add or do your penneth worth?
Well, it was a very thorough presentation, wasn't it? It was fabulous and great to hear about the journey that you've been on and all that you've achieved. The electric